According to General Hospital spoilers, Danny Morgan and Rocco Falconeri may discover Drew Kane floating in the sea and struggle to figure out who the victim is. GH has published a preview video for the week of August 25th to 29th, with Rocco and Danny making a shocking discovery. The teenagers are taken aback when they notice a body drifting down by the dock. Of course, depending on the writer's intentions, there are numerous possibilities for how this could play out. If Rick Lansing does not survive Ava Jerome's strike to the head, this could be related to his body disposal. This body may potentially be a throwaway character, similar to Ezra Boyle. However, we must view Drew as a prospective victim. Because threats are being made at Drew left and right, you can expect that someone will try to take his life shortly. Drew could be shot or injured in another way before the harbor is discovered. Drew may still have a chance of survival if Danny and Rocco come to his rescue. Rocco and Danny may be able to rescue Drew's life by bringing him out of the water and resuscitating him. Drew might be saved from drowning and receive the medical care he requires if he is injured. Cameron Matheson announced on Instagram that he will not leave the program, which is worth noting here. Assuming Matheson is telling the truth, we can expect him to remain in some form. That could indicate Drew will survive whatever awful tragedy awaits him. Danny and Rocco may eventually emerge as unexpected heroes for Drew. Even if Drew is killed, it is possible that he is an imposter and the real Drew is still alive somewhere. The program may bring additional surprises as Drew's plot progresses. Regardless, General Hospital rumors indicate that Rocco and Danny will be terrified by the body finding they are about to make, so stay tuned for updates on the shocking news. General Hospital spoilers for the next 3 weeks, August 25th to September 12th, reveal that fans will learn more about Henry Hank Dalton's secret study. Drew Kane is in grave danger, and Nathan West may be involved. During the week of August 25th to 29th, Jason Morgan puts pressure on Britt Westbourne to leave the Five Poppies resort with him. Maxie Jones' family is devastated to learn that she would not be able to recover from her coma and will be transported out of state. Meanwhile, Alexis Davis lashes out in public over Drew's restraining order. Molly Lansing Davis discovers more about Cody Bell and Christina Corinthos Davis' scheme to seduce Ava Jerome. Will Christina reveal the truth once in her life? Elsewhere, Giovanni Gio Palmieri receives excellent advice from Marco Rios and softens toward Dante Falconeri. Fans will watch Sonny Corinthos deliver a pep talk, but is it to Christina or to Ada Justine Turner? Portia Robinson gets an eyeful. Is it her adversary Jordan Ashford cozying up to her husband Curtis Ashford? Or is it a classic douchey Drew move? Drew continues to exploit Willow Tate, who is desperate to get her children back. And when Trina Robinson needs assistance, she turns to Kai Taylor. Will Kai ultimately realize Drew is a dog and turn against him to help Trina's family? Drew's troubles worsen from the 1st to the 5th of September. Have you noticed how everyone is taking pot shots at him in public? If we didn't know better, we may believe a whodunit is on the way. Jason returns to the Five Poppies resort to find himself in a battle with Jocelyn and Vaughn. How will Britt fit into this risky situation? The week of September 8th to 12th, fans could discover more about Professor Dalton's study effort. Is there a big surprise on the horizon? Peter August is running the show? And how does Ryan Paevey's homecoming fit into all of this? Has Nathan gone dark? This is the show that brought us Casey the alien, so we shouldn't be surprised to see a clone wandering around, or at least Peter trying to be Nathan. We still don't sure who Paevey is portraying, but we believe he is involved in the complicated plot involving Dalton, Britt, and Jen Sidwell. General Hospital spoilers hint that the following 3 weeks will be exciting, so stay tuned, GH lovers. The atmosphere of Port Charles has transformed over the previous few days. Something electric, even lethal, appeared to linger in the atmosphere. Dalton, as usual, was seen pacing in the shadows of his office, files and plans strewn across the polished table, while rumors among the staff hinted to a massive surprise. He had always been ambitious, and his most recent initiative threatened to shake the city to its core, but no one outside of his tight circle fully knew what he was proposing. Of course, rumors circulated like wildfire through the hospital halls, fueled by a combination of curiosity and terror. Brooke Lynn had heard the first murmurs when she arrived at the hospital that morning, with Dalton's name echoing from nurse to nurse. Something about a project, a secret, something that kept him working late at night. She could sense the tension, as if a storm was about to hit Port Charles, but the details were unclear at best. She saw Dalton through the glass door of his office, slumped over a massive schematic, his brow furrowed and his countenance unreadable. There was a weight about him now that had nothing to do with medical responsibilities or personal stress. It was as if the man has the ability to change the entire balance of power in the city on his shoulders. Meanwhile, the enigma surrounding Nathan had escalated from murmurs to outright speculation. The man had appeared unexpectedly, a stranger with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a polished charm, and a presence that worried nearly everyone he met. To the casual observer, he was just another name on the hospital's extensive list of consultants, but those who paid attention could tell that Nathan's entrance was anything but fortuitous. People had noted the tiny exchanges between him and Drew, and how Drew's normally controlled demeanor frayed around the edges whenever Nathan entered a room. There were questions that begged to be answered, such as, who was Nathan? Why had he come to Port Charles at this specific time? And perhaps most disturbingly, what connection did he have with Drew, a man already on the verge of moral collapse? Drew had been a figure of intrigue for years, a guy whose ambition and cunning had always been balanced by a steady hand and a mind that calculated every action. However, his control had just slipped. Those closest to him had observed the subtle signs. His erratic pacing in his apartment, his harsh phone responses, and the sleepless evenings when he looked into emptiness as if solving an impossible conundrum. Drew had always thrived in turmoil, relishing the challenge of twisting things to his will, but Nathan's presence appeared to present an unpredictability that he couldn't predict or influence. When Drew believed he had the upper hand, Nathan would interrupt with a question, a comment, or a seemingly benign observation that left Drew disturbed, unsure, and on edge. Dalton's project unveiling simply fueled the fire. The city was buzzing with gossip, and while Dalton kept his professional demeanor, those who knew him well grasped the enormity of his undertaking. The project itself was complicated, encompassing not just the hospital's infrastructure, but also a web of corporate investments, municipal politics, and personal interests. Dalton had always been clever, careful to maintain appearances while quietly manipulating behind the scenes, and now, for the first time in years, it appeared like he was about to step into a role that would completely change the power dynamics in Port Charles. However, with this ambition came exposure. Dalton's attention on his objectives had left him vulnerable, and those who were aware of Drew's powers could not help but see an opportunity. The animosity between Drew and Nathan grew stronger over time. Drew's attempts to assert dominance, to convince himself and others around him that he was still in control, were greeted with subtle opposition. Nathan's intelligence was not only brilliant, but also dangerous in a way that Drew could not disregard. Unlike other players in Drew's universe, Nathan did not appear to be scared by reputation, wealth, or manipulation. He took a steady, methodical approach, asking seemingly innocuous questions that held hidden meaning, probing for flaws and watching reactions with unwavering precision. Drew, who was used to being the predator rather than the prey, found himself increasingly disoriented, locked in a game whose rules appeared to change with each encounter. The city, ignorant of the tension seething beneath its surface, went about its daily routine. Patients arrived at the hospital, emergencies required attention, and the personnel performed their tasks with a sense of practiced routine. But in the corridors and behind closed doors, murmurs about Dalton's initiative and Nathan's unknown background created a sense of dread. Rumors of potential alliances, betrayals, and explosive disclosures hovered like storm clouds, ready to burst at any moment. Even those who were not directly involved could feel the tremors of oncoming conflict, a sense that the calm before the storm was about to break into chaos. Meanwhile, Drew's strategies grew increasingly desperate. He began overthinking, returning to past plans and contingencies with a meticulousness bordering on obsession. He analyzed every interaction with Nathan, looking for a clue, a slip, or anything that could create leverage. However, Nathan remained elusive, a master of subtlety, responding in ways that irritated Drew and tried his patience. Every interaction seemed like a chess match, and Drew, who had always prided himself on anticipating moves before they were made, realized he was losing control. The sense of control he formerly wielded so easily was slipping through his fingers, and the strain began to show in subtle ways. A clenched jaw, a stiff posture, a brief pause before responding. At the same time, Dalton persisted with his endeavor, unconscious of the inner upheaval raging around him. He was thorough in his planning, relying on his experience and foresight, but the magnitude of what he was undertaking meant that even the tiniest error could have disastrous effects. Dalton would pause from time to time to assess his work late into the night, evaluating both the potential impact on the hospital and the larger ramifications for the community. He was aware that ambition entailed risk, that success and exposure were inextricably intertwined, but he couldn't let hesitancy derail his goal. The convergence of Dalton's goals and Drew's breakdown created almost palpable tension in Port Charles. Those who paid careful attention could see the patterns emerging: Drew's rising volatility, Dalton's deliberate advances, and Nathan's enigmatic influence, a presence that appeared to delicately shift the balance between the two men. Every discussion, encounter, and glance became weighted with significance, a possible trigger for the next shift in the complex web of alliances and rivals. The city, which appeared tranquil on the surface, was essentially a pressure cooker, waiting to erupt with events that may change the social and political environment. Brooke Lynn, trapped in the midst of these swirling energies, felt increasingly uneasy. She had seen Drew at his most deadly, understood his ability to manipulate, but the weakness she suddenly sensed in him was both frightening and alluring. She also grasped the importance of Dalton's initiative, both its potential for greatness and the danger of falling into the wrong hands. Then there was Nathan, a wild card whose genuine motives remained unknown, whose mere presence appeared to unsettle Drew and confuse every calculation. It was a complicated web of ambition, fear, devotion, and secrecy, and anyone trapped in it had to exercise caution. As the days passed, occurrences occurred that appeared insignificant on the surface but hinted at the mounting severity of the situation. A file has suddenly disappeared from Dalton's office. Drew and an unnamed associate engaged in a whispered talk. Nathan's seemingly casual comment threw Drew into a tailspin of speculation. Each episode could have been ignored on its own, but when taken together, they presented a picture of a city on the verge of collapse, a web of intentions and acts that could not be easily unraveled. Drew's mental state got more fragile. Those close to him saw disorientation, outbursts of rage, and unusual errors in judgment. He had previously depended on his intelligence, charisma, and ability to maneuver situations to keep control, but Nathan's influence, along with the growing shadow of Dalton's project, produced a psychological pressure that threatened to overtake him. Friends and opponents alike began to wonder if Drew's end was near, if the man who had once appeared invincible was finally confronting the repercussions of his own deeds and miscalculations. Dalton, meantime, moved with care, knowing that timing will be critical in the following days. His project reveal was more than just personal ambition. It was a statement, a rebalancing of power, and a challenge to anyone who could oppose him. The reveal would be theatrical, designed to maximize impact and convey a strong message to anyone who might doubt his powers. Nonetheless, even Dalton couldn't deny the psychological dynamics at work, the nuanced interplay between Drew and Nathan, and the unforeseen ways in which human ambition and emotion may collide with calculating plans. The city itself appeared to sense the change, with a palpable tension in the air, a calm expectation that something major was about to happen. Conversations in the cafeteria, hallways, and hospital waiting rooms were all full with curiosity, skepticism, and expectancy. Nobody could say exactly what was coming, but the sensation of impending disclosure was impossible to deny. Dalton's research, Drew's breakdown, and Nathan's enigmatic presence formed a perfect storm, an alignment of forces that could only result in spectacular repercussions. As darkness descended over Port Charles, Drew found himself alone in his apartment, staring at the city skyline with a look of exasperation, fear, and determination on his face. He had always believed he could manipulate any situation to his will, but today he felt the ground shift beneath him. Nathan's presence, Dalton's objectives, and the myriad unknown variables left him feeling unmoored, nearly foreign. Every strategy he had devised, every contingency he had addressed, now appeared insufficient, subject to the unpredictable nature of human behavior. In contrast, Dalton worked diligently, collecting his team, examining every detail, and preparing for the time when his idea would be revealed. He recognized the risks, both personal and professional, and addressed the issue with focus, forethought, and resolve. The tension of secret, the weight of ambition, and the prospect of exposure propelled him onward, with each move calculated, deliberate, and intentional. The contrast between Dalton's controlled assurance and Drew's disintegration could not have been sharper. Finally, the situation in Port Charles was a study in contrasts. Ambition versus desperation, control versus anarchy, and secrecy versus openness. Dalton's endeavor, the enigmatic Nathan, and Drew's deteriorating condition all contributed to a palpable tension that appeared to permeate the entire city. Allies observed, rivals calculated, and life went on as usual, unaware of the complicated and high-stakes drama playing out beneath the surface. Every instant, every glance, every whispered word had significance, and the implications of each action would ripple outward, changing the future in ways no one could have predicted. The stress would not subside immediately. Drew's possible unraveling, Dalton's reveal, and Nathan's strange influence ensured that the turmoil in Port Charles would only heat up. Relationships would be challenged, loyalties strained, and trust boundaries pushed to their breaking point. In this environment, even the slightest decision had enormous consequences, and every character, whether directly involved or not, became a part of a much larger story. The city was on the verge of transformation, and the forces at work promised to leave an indelible impression, permanently altering the terrain of ambition, power, and personal intrigue in Port Charles. And throughout it all, the question stayed in the minds of everyone who dared to think about it. Could Drew withstand the disintegration of his own well-crafted universe, or was this the point at which even his cunning and ambition failed him? Dalton's project loomed as a light of potential and importance, and Nathan's presence blurred the lines between friend and foe. The city held its breath as the next chapter of this high-stakes drama began to unravel, a saga of power, intrigue, and human ambition that would put every character to the test in ways they could not have predicted. The hospital lobby was unusually quiet that morning, with a tense silence hanging in the air. Dalton walked through, phone held to his ear, jaw clenched. "I need the final numbers on my desk by noon." "No excuses," he said, ending the call with a crisp click. Even the nurses paused to observe him, sensing the intensity radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Brooke Lynn's forehead furrowed as she saw him across the hall. There was something different about Dalton today, something more deadly, like a storm lurking beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Drew stood in his apartment, pacing in a figure-8 formation. The city lights reflected on the glass, but he didn't see them. Why now? Why him? He murmured beneath his breath, hands clenched. Nathan had entered Port Charles quietly, almost too quietly, but his presence had already startled Drew. Drew's previously measured plans now felt like shifting sands. Nathan's calm, measured demeanor during the last few days had pierced Drew's armor in ways he could not ignore. Across town, Nathan sat in a cafe, laptop open, sipping coffee as if nothing was occurring. But he was aware of what was going on. He had studied Drew, observed his habits, and discovered his flaws. "He's smart," Nathan softly told himself. But even smart people slip when the pressure is right. He typed a few words, paused, and then clicked send. Drew would read it somewhere, and continue to unravel. By late afternoon, Dalton's workplace had evolved into a battle zone. Charts, blueprints, and documents cluttered the table. "Everyone stay sharp," Dalton instructed, staring at his teammates. "This project is more than just another job. It's bigger than us and the hospital. If we get this right, Port Charles will never be the same." His eyes were focused, examining the features of his colleagues, daring anyone to question him. Dalton had no idea that Drew had already begun planning countermeasures. He sat at his desk, documents scattered and phone calls unanswered, attempting to recover control of an increasingly intolerable situation. His imagination raced through all imaginable scenarios. "If I can just know that won't work," he growled, pounding his fist into the desk. Drew, who rarely admits defeat, experienced the creeping sensation of losing control, a perilous feeling he had long avoided. Brooke Lynn, attempting to make sense of the turmoil, walked by Drew's building and caught a sight of him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He appeared different, tense, almost haunted. She noticed how his eyes darted from corner to corner, and an icy shiver ran down her spine. That was Drew at his worst. Dangerous, desperate, and unpredictable. However, something else sparked in his eyes: fear. Later, Dalton assembled his closest allies for a special announcement. "This project isn't just about infrastructure," he said, slicing his hands across the air to emphasize. "This is a statement. The future. And once that is public, everything changes." His voice was clear with no hesitancy. The weight of ambition pressed down on the crowd, drawing in everyone who listened. The rippling effect was immediate. Drew got a notice on his phone. A mysterious message from Nathan. "Are you prepared for what is coming?" It was simple and modest, yet Drew felt a chill run through him. He stared at the television, his heart racing. For the first time, he knew he was not in control. Nathan had invaded his world in ways Dalton could not, through uncertainty and subtle disturbance. Drew attempted to use his regular tactics, but Nathan's presence was more than that. It was psychological. Drew's conversations suddenly carried concealed weight. Every phrase is a potential trigger. He called a colleague, his voice low and urgent. "I need to know everything about Nathan. His connections, his past, anything." There was desperation in there, something Drew typically masks with charm. But suddenly charm seemed pointless. Dalton, meanwhile, methodically prepared for the public debut. He double-checked the statistics, practiced his explanations, and imagined the city's reaction. The team gathered around him, sharing the anxiety and excitement. For Dalton, this was more than simply a project. It was destiny. The world would witness his vision, and Port Charles would have no choice but to acknowledge his brilliance. Brooklyn watched from the sidelines as the pieces came into place. Drew's desperation, Nathan's calculating moves, and Dalton's unflinching confidence combined to create a perfect storm. She couldn't foretell what would happen next, but she could sense the impending collision. It was a high-stakes game in which one false move might cost lives, careers, and reputations. As night fell, Drew sat alone in his flat, the city lights throwing long shadows. He was pacing and grumbling, attempting to solve a conundrum with no obvious solution. He stroked his face, fatigued but unable to relax. "I can't lose," he said quietly, even though he knew the words were empty. For the first time, the prospect of failure loomed like a creature waiting silently in the dark. In contrast, Dalton had a controlled euphoria. He went over his presentation one more time, scrutinizing every detail. He understood the unveiling would change everything: public perception, power, alliances, and he was prepared. His ambition, focus, and intellect were ideally suited with the situation. He was the calm in the storm that was about to batter Port Charles. Nathan, ever the observer, watched from a distance. He had sown the seeds of uncertainty, pushed Drew into instability, and now waited to watch how the dominoes fell. "This is going to be interesting," he said, a slight smile forming on the corner of his lips. The mayhem had begun, and he had orchestrated it with surgical precision. The night concluded with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Drew, Dalton, and Nathan were all players on a chessboard, with the ultimate goal of gaining complete control over Port Charles's future. Alliances were delicate, ambitions were enormous, and the city itself served as a quiet witness to the drama that would soon explode into reality. Nobody knew what the next day would bring, except that everything was about to change. Drew's unraveling, Dalton's reveal, and Nathan's covert tactics guaranteed that Port Charles would never be the same again. Friendships would be tested, loyalties stretched, and secrets revealed in unexpected ways. The tension was excruciating, but also irresistible. A veritable maelstrom of drama, power, and ambition, ready to engulf every life in its path.